So please welcome on stage the best panel discussion.
Should we sit in the same order?
Hello. Okay. All right. Hello, everyone. This is Kenichiro Hara from DCM Ventures. We are Menlo Park-based venture capital. So today we have two key members from Ripple on Fireside Chat. Let me introduce them again. So Stefan, he's a CTO of Ripple, and David, he's a chief cryptographer at Ripple. So David and Stefan, it's very honored to have you on this Fireside Chat in Tokyo. And let me dive into the questions. So first, tell us your story. How do you get started in this?
Do you want me to start?
You want me to go first? You want to go first?
I'll go first. So the way I got started in crypto was I had just sold my previous company, which was completely unrelated, nothing to do with payments. But as a result, I wanted to kind of take a break and not do anything too intense for a while. And I came across Bitcoin, and I've always had sort of an understanding of payments and like the fact that payments were a big pain point for entrepreneurs and for a lot of people. And Bitcoin seemed to promise a solution or promise a way forward. And it was very technologist driven at that time. It was all geeks and so on. And so it felt like I would fit right in, and I kind of joined the community, and yeah, that's how I got into it.
So my story starts in probably the middle of 2011. I was working for a company that does secure cloud storage and secure messaging, and I was always interested in cryptography. And I actually just was kind of browsing randomly one day, and I think I used a website called StumbleUpon, where you tell it what you're interested in, it tells you what it thinks you should be interested in. And it pointed me to this website for Bitcoin. And I think it took me about an hour before I had that aha moment that this might be the next big thing, that there was something really different, really important here. Plus the point, I was a cryptographer, and this seemed to be something that was like cryptography was right at the heart of it. So like, why am I not involved in this? So I found my way around the Bitcoin community, and at least at the time, they were very open and welcoming. They were all very excited about what they were doing, and I started to develop on top of it.
I'm actually really surprised because I never knew that you found it through StumbleUpon. I found it through StumbleUpon as well. So a big shout out to that website.
Well, it has a more important role in the history of Ripple than either of us knew.
We ever realized, yeah.
Okay, interesting. So you guys have been very famous faces in this field. So I actually had two questions. Why you guys are Joel Kotz and Just Moon?
Well, I'll go first. So when I was in high school, I had a friend who was starting a bulletin board system. Anybody here know what a bulletin board system is? Okay, we got a couple of older people here, or people who are interested in the early tech. So he asked me if I wanted an account, and I said, sure, why not? And he said, you want to use your real name? And I'm like, hell no, I don't know what I'm going to be doing on this. I don't want people tracking. I mean, I didn't want my real name. So he said, well, what name do you want to use? And I said, I don't know, just make one up. Well, Ren and Stimpy was pretty popular at the time. Anybody here know Ren and Stimpy? Probably a couple of you do. Stimpy's real name is Stimpson J. Katz, C-A-T. And so he said, well, I'll make you Stimpson J. Katz, K-A-T-Z. That's sort of a little more human. And after a while, I started to do things that were more serious. I was talking to people about ideas that were important, and the internet started to become more of a part of my life, and I decided I needed a less ridiculous name. But I didn't want to do like a hard cut, and I didn't want to reveal my real name. So I engaged on a kind of strategic rebranding. I don't know if any of you know the story about how 3M got its name from Minnesota mining and manufacturing, but the same idea. Like, I wanted a slicker, less cumbersome name, but I didn't want to just like have a new name one day. So I hatched this plan where I would first go from Stimpson J. Katz to Stimpson Joel Katz. I mean, why not? I had a middle initial. It had to stand for something, right? And then I went from Stimpson Joel Katz to S. Joel Katz. That's something a lot of people do. If they don't particularly like their first name, they prefer their middle name, they abbreviate their first name down to an initial, and then I just dropped the initial. And so that's how I became Joel Katz.
Cool. So for me, like, there's a lot of theories out there, I think, about what Just Moon means. Like, more recently in the crypto community, to moon means like for a cryptocurrency to go very high. Has nothing to do with that. For a long time, people thought I was involved in Just Coin somehow because Just Moon, Just Coin, nothing to do with that either. I actually chose the name all the way back in, I want to say 2003. And what's happening was I was running a website at that time that was sort of involved with gaming, the gaming community. And my nickname at that time was Moon, just like the word Moon. And there was a very famous video game player, so esports player, and their name was also Moon, and they came from the same small town in Germany, and they were just a year older than I was. And so a lot of people assumed, since I was sort of on IRC and I was an admin and so on, they were like, oh, you're that famous video game player. And I would always say, like, no, I'm just Moon, like the guy who runs the site. And so the Just Moon just stuck, and I stuck to it.
All right, that's cool. That was very mysterious for me. All right, it's good to know. So let's move on to the questions around the protocol. So if you could go back and reinvent Bitcoin with fundamentally better approach, what would you do?
I mean, you can't really answer that one because you kind of did that, and XRP is the result.
That is kind of exactly what we did. We had the advantage of looking at how Bitcoin had performed for about 2 years, seeing what we liked and what we didn't like, and we had the opportunity to keep what we liked and change what we didn't like. But I think one of the key differences and one of the important things is building in governance from the beginning. I think people were very naive in the beginning that you didn't need governance. Everybody could just enforce all the rules. But I think Bitcoin has demonstrated on several different occasions, particularly when there are bugs. I don't know if any of you remember, there was a blockchain fork where humans had to decide which of two chains would win because the rules were a bit ambiguous, and human intervention was necessary, actual human consensus. And I think one of the key things that Bitcoin got wrong, largely either for ideological reasons or lack of experience, was they didn't realize the importance of some kind of governance. And I think they pay that price to this day because it's very difficult for the protocol to adapt. One thing that we all thought in the early days of Bitcoin was that if any new technology came out or any new protocol, they couldn't unseat Bitcoin or threaten Bitcoin dominance because Bitcoin could just adopt any technology that was beneficial. And I think time has proven that you need governance to adopt new technology. You can't just form an ad hoc group to do it. And as we've seen in the recent fork. So I think the importance of governance is something that was badly missed in the beginning.
Yeah, I would say for me the biggest thing would be when I first got into Bitcoin, I always thought that the blockchain would be the solution. The fact that it's a decentralized system would be the sort of key feature of it. And I think now more that it's not how your ledger works that's important, but rather what is the environment around the ledger, the environment that ledger operates in. And so what we have today is we have all these like different siloed systems. So we have Visa, and we have MasterCard, and we have Swift, and we have Bitcoin. And right now I can't do a transaction from one system to the other, right? I can't make a payment across. And so as a result, any system that has a lot of users can automatically charge a lot more money and can sort of be a little bit less efficient. People just have to deal with it because it's the only system that the person I'm trying to pay is actually on. And I think that's striking how different that is compared to the internet, where I could be on Wi-Fi network, or I could be on a wired connection, or maybe I'm on an airplane with a satellite connection, and it doesn't matter. I can still go to every website, and the website owner doesn't have to have separate servers for each of those different network standards that are all competing. And so what's missing, or was missing in the Bitcoin world, I think, was sort of this competition. Like if I don't like Bitcoin's proof of work, what do I use instead? If I don't like the economics, if I don't like the way the coin is issued, what do I use instead? And so I think what we've come to realize over the last couple of years is sort of what's important is creating a universal reach that touches every ledger so that people can choose the ledger they like the most. And then that creates competition, and that creates almost like it's like a meta feature, right? Rather than having features in the ledger that are important, it's almost a feature of the entire market, the entire economy. We realized that that's so much more important because just decentralization doesn't really help lower fees. Bitcoin went up to $40 per transaction last year. So it's not the decentralization that helps you, it's the way the market works overall.
Yeah, the idea that you can build one system that's so good that everybody will want to use it without any competition just doesn't seem realistic. Both because people legitimately want different things, they have different use cases and applications, but also because we're not smart enough to just build things out of like central command that are perfect. We need competitive pressure to spur innovation and to build things that are going to be better.
Yeah, this is very interesting. So I have one more related question on that point. So in layman's terms, can you help us understand the difference between consensus and proof of work?
Sure. So the difference between consensus and proof of work, boy, it's kind of hard to put in layman's terms. It's even hard to put proof of work in layman's terms. But I think the key difference is that proof of work is a system. Well, let me talk first about what problem they're both trying to solve. They're solving the same problem, and that problem is not how do we know what transactions are valid, because we all know what transactions are valid. We test them for validity. The problem that we have is that a system like Bitcoin or Ripple or any cryptocurrency system can make forward progress in different directions that are both legal. So if I have one Bitcoin or one XRP or one Litecoin or one anything, I could decide to give it to you, or I could decide to give it to you. And something has to stop me from doing both of those things. That's really the problem that both proof of work and distributed agreement protocols are trying to solve. How do we decide which of those two transactions we're going to rely on? Because if we pick different ones, we have a problem. If he trusts that I paid him and Stefan thinks I paid him, now we have a problem because we've either created two Bitcoins or someone thinks they have a Bitcoin they don't. Now, proof of work solves that problem in a way that's conceptually decentralized in the sense that anybody can mine, but it's functionally centralizing because someone will have the lowest price on electricity, someone will have the best mining hardware. It hasn't produced the actual decentralization that it promised to produce. And I think as far as distributing the currency initially, what really happens is people wind up getting Bitcoin, selling them, and using them to pay for electricity, which is value generated by the ecosystem proof of work is built on top of that doesn't go into that ecosystem. But I think also, if you want competition, proof of work really can't give it to you because you can't change the system. Let's say I want to compete with Bitcoin and I want to make some changes to it. The problem is if I can't incentivize miners to the tune of millions of dollars a day, I don't even have a secure network. So I can't even get through the door. What it does is it gives Bitcoin a sort of position as at the top and network effects because there's a giant moat around it. It's made it very expensive to compete with it. I don't think we want systems that get adoption because it's expensive to compete with them. We want systems that get adoption because they're the best. And I think one of the things that an agreement protocol like what we built for XRP can do is it can allow that competition. It doesn't require you to incentivize miners. It allows you to just basically choose people who will put transactions in order. And if they don't do a good job, you just change who you choose. So it's a much simpler solution to a very limited problem. And I know there's a lot of heat in the community about how proof of work is so much better. Remember, the only thing that we're doing is if you have two valid transactions received at about the same time, we're deciding which one to execute first. That isn't even something that we should really care about. Like, we should care about the properties of the system. We should care about what's a valid transaction, what's the utility of the token. There's no reason conceptually that we should really care how we solve the double spend problem so long as we do. To build a moat around it and to sort of suck millions of dollars a day of value. The Bitcoin system, the Bitcoin community, the users of Bitcoin, whether they're speculators or whether they're using it for payment, they are creating all the value that's going to electric companies and ASIC manufacturers. Let's not have illusions about that. If that money didn't go to ASIC manufacturers and electric companies, it would still be in the Bitcoin ecosystem. It could be funding Bitcoin development. It could be raising the value of Bitcoin. So I think people should have their eyes open about the downsides of proof of stake. That said, I like Bitcoin. I'm not anti-Bitcoin. I think there is certainly room for a proof of stake system and proof of work system, and they certainly solved an important problem. But I think we should be realistic about what that technology has actually given us, and not just pretend that it's absolutely perfect because we would like it to be.
Yeah, I can't compete with that level of detail, but I will give my attempt to put it in layman's terms. I would say, in proof of work, you're essentially choosing a puzzle, and then you assume that the people that can solve that puzzle efficiently won't collude with each other. In consensus, what you do is you choose people that you believe won't collude with each other. So in terms of the pros and cons, the main pro that proof of work has, in my view, is that it's automated. I don't have to make a manual decision. The assumption is, the automatic decision will be good enough. In something like consensus, I actually have to configure how my validator works and who it's going to listen to. And so I get a lot more control and potentially more security if I make a good choice, but I also have more of an opportunity to shoot myself in the foot. And it's easy to understand why Ripple would go into more of an enterprise direction, because if you think about it, if you're an enterprise, you're probably sophisticated enough to make those choices effectively and then end up with a much more secure system with much better validators, more geographically distributed, better uptime, more secure data centers, and of course you don't waste all that electricity. But if you're targeting like consumers, or if you want to have a completely like anonymous underground system, something like that, then you'd want to use something like proof of work probably.
Cool. So today we have like a few thousand tokens out there. And what makes XRP different from any other assets?
I have to say the use case, the use case for settling payments, and I think secondarily I would highlight the cost, the ability to handle 1,000 transactions plus per second, the ability to have certainty of transaction confirmation in just a few seconds. If we're going to have a competitive marketplace where people can use the system that works best for them, those kinds of characteristics are going to be extremely important. And I think also there's, to some extent, network effects are certainly undeniable. You want to use the thing that other people are using. And I mean, XRP is certainly not number one in that regard, but we're not far behind. So I think of the tokens that you could realistically use, the speed and performance. I think I'd also have to highlight some of the additional features of our ledger, which not a lot of people know about, but it has a lot of advanced features to provide for security that that competing systems typically don't have. Like, I'll give you one example. Let's say I had a Bitcoin address that I had publicly announced to people. I said, hey, you want to send me money? Send it to this Bitcoin address. And let's say I don't want to deal with the Bitcoin system. I just want to let Stefan turn that into dollars and deposit into my account. What I have to do is I have to give Stefan my private key. There's in practice no other way I can let Stefan manage it. And now let's say I don't want to use Stefan anymore. Maybe he's charging more than I'm willing to pay. He has a competitor who's charging less. What do? I have to go to all the people I've given the Bitcoin address to and give them a new one, or I have to give somebody else the secret key that Stefan also has. It's a real management problem. The XRP ledger has key rotation and multi-sign built in, and you can change the properties of your account without having to move your funds or changing the address that people send money to. We have a distributed, decentralized exchange. It's the largest one on the planet, about the equivalent of about 300 million Japanese yen a day in volume on this decentralized exchange. You can create arbitrary assets on the ledger. So I think if you look objectively at the advantages and the features that we have, I think you definitely see the advantages of building on the XRP ledger and using XRP as an asset.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think the thing I would ask people to do is not to focus on just the asset and the properties of the asset, because it's kind of like the entire payment solution is like a machine, and the digital asset itself is just one screw in that machine. And yeah, you're relying on that screw somewhere in the operation of that machine, but it's part of a whole, So if you're just looking at the asset, and even if you're just looking at the properties of a distributed ledger, you're kind of missing a lot of other things that need to go into making this a viable solution. So when you saw David present earlier, he mentioned this product called xRapid. And so there's all kinds of parts to xRapid that involve, the rule set that a bank might use to move payments through a digital asset, the support that our customer support team provides to the bank, the guarantees for FX rates that a market maker might provide, all those kinds of things, they all come together to then create something useful that a company could use to move payments around. And so I would say the biggest strength of XRP, and that's kind of how you started out your answer, is it has a clear use case and an entire solution built to solve that use case.
I think one of the biggest things that you're going to see is broader adoption, a broader set of validators. You're going to continue to see the security that you've seen, the performance that you've seen. Those things are probably not going to change. But I think the biggest thing is decentralization. I don't think that significant innovation is needed on the ledger side. I think the ledger has the features that we need for the use case and for related use cases. And I think that there's sort of a downside to innovation for innovation's sake. When you change a system that people are using, everybody who uses that system has to analyze and understand that change. At a minimum, they have to say, oh, that doesn't affect me, I don't have to do anything about it. But that decision has a cost. So I don't think that you're going to see tremendous innovation at the ledger level. I don't think that's really where it needs to be. The ledger needs to be secure, it needs to perform well, it needs to be decentralized, and it needs to be well governed in the sense that if there's a problem, you have to have a process to fix it. But it's everything around that that's important. And for the future of XRP outside the ledger, exchange adoption, the pools of liquidity that Ripple's working to build for xRapid, it's that whole ecosystem that I think is where the real value is going to be.
Yeah, so I think with XRP, the thing that you mentioned, the reliability has been sort of the focus. And there's a lot of use cases that we intentionally didn't implement because they would have jeopardized the number one use case, the payments use case that we're most interested in. And so I would say, like, what's the roadmap? Like, it's not a very exciting answer, but the answer is to keep being the only digital asset that's actually cheap, reliable, and fast to transfer 24/7, every day, with 5 nines of availability, and hopefully more even. So that's kind of what we're focused on, and yeah. Yeah,
like, to know what you are, you also have to know what you aren't. There's kind of a tendency to want to be all things to all people, and I don't think that's possible. I don't think there can be one system. There can't be one ledger that's going to be all things to all people. And we get people who ask us about use cases like trade finance, which is very exciting. It's a good use case for a technology similar to what we're doing. It's a use case that we could have pursued, but we opted to pursue payment and settlement instead. And I think you're going to see us just ensuring that we provide the features that those use cases require.
So yeah, there are many like Ripple developers here in Japan. So tell us the tech roadmap for xRapid and ILP and other products.
Yeah. So right now, ILP is at a point where we can start to actually build real applications. So I don't know how many of you saw the keynote that I gave yesterday. And that is just one example of a use case, basically helping to fix the business model of the web, giving web developers and companies that have web apps or web presences, blogs, video sites online, everything like that, giving them a new way to monetize that content in a way that they can get money directly from the user without any intermediaries, without ads, without having to get users to subscribe and so on. And so it's a really great use case because it requires you to have very small payments, many senders with many receivers, and so it's a great way to leverage some of the technology that we're building. So I think that's the answer for the ILP side. It's if you're a web developer, go to intelledger.org, go check it out. There's tutorials. You can play with the technology. It's really meant to be used. It's not it's not behind a walled garden. It's not for enterprise. It's something that any developer can try out right away. And then for xRapid, do you want to? Should I?
You can.
Yeah. So for xRapid, I think it's mostly like we have a couple of companies that are in production right now, like Qualix, for example, sending payments into Mexico using XRP for liquidity. And so I think the next step for xRapid is essentially to scale it up, get more customers. So I wouldn't say that's probably not something where external developers have much way to get involved unless you're a kind of company that we're working with. But it's kind of like just scaling up the network, getting more customers. Yeah.
So a lot of people wonder how ILP ties into what we're doing on the xRapid and the XRP ledger side. I just want to point out another key difference between us and many other companies or projects. Many other companies or projects that have a particular token or blockchain that they're pushing, their objective is to get people into that blockchain, to lock people into that solution, to offer features that will draw people into that system. And or force them to use it or tie it into other things. Our approach is exactly the opposite. We think that if we build a system that's the best for a particular use case, people will use that system if they're free to use the system of their choice. So paradoxically, to drive XRP adoption and to drive use of our ledger, if we really are the best for this use case like we think we are, what we need to do is we need to drive competition. We need to enable a level playing field where the systems that are the best can rise to the top. It's to some extent a paradoxical strategy that we're building this ILP, which is an open protocol. It's a very simple protocol. It can be used by any ledger, whether it's a blockchain type ledger, whether it's a traditional ledger. But what it will enable is for different use cases, the ledger that's the best for that use case will be able to be used without obstacles. So if I have assets on one ledger and you need to get paid in another ledger, I can do that. We believe that if we have that level playing field and if we have that broad market that we can, it's like if you think about a company like Twitter, what's their market? Their market is internet users. Like Twitter doesn't have a service if they don't have a market. So Twitter benefits from an internet. If they're the best service for short messages to be shared, then they want broad internet adoption. They don't need the internet to seek to trick you into using Twitter. They don't need the internet to be biased or unfair. And that would hurt them, because they want the broadest possible adoption for them to have the broadest possible market. Our strategy is very, very analogous. Interledger will not only make payments better, cheaper, and eliminate that sort of lock-in, but it will allow the best ledgers to dominate their use cases because they won't have that kind of lock-in.
I often like to compare Ripple to Cisco, because Cisco, they didn't need to own TCP/IP. They didn't need to make it proprietary. They benefited plenty by being the best vendor for sort of enterprise-grade routers. And so what we want to be is like the best vendor for enterprise-grade routers for money. And we want XRP to be the best asset for routing money. And so at the height of the internet boom, actually became the largest company in the world by market cap, just to give you an idea of how big of an opportunity that could be. And so for us, that's plenty big. And in fact, if we didn't pursue this kind of strategy, if we pursued a strategy like, let's say the Bitcoin maximalists, where you're trying to get everyone to use your particular currency and your thing, then the risk that you're taking is that some other interoperability solution does come out, and then other people are optimizing their solutions for that world, and you have missed the boat. And so we think it's very important to build for like an interoperable future where there is a lot of competition, because that's driving us to have very high efficiency and very good user experience and so on.
Cool. So let's touch on the title of this workshop, Internet of Value. So why should we care about Internet value?
So, I mean, I have my own personal stories that I like to tell whenever I explain like why do I care about payments. I think by and large, what's going on right now is that there's sort of this increasing centralization that's happening. So if you look at the internet, more and more traffic is going through fewer and fewer websites. More and more people have Facebook pages and not their own websites. And I think partly what's driving that on the payment side is that payments is just introducing a lot of friction that only large organizations can deal with. And I'll give you an example. So if you want to support payments into a lot of different jurisdictions, a lot of different countries, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to support a lot of different payment methods. You want to pay into Tanzania? Well, there are 3 major mobile money providers in Tanzania that you need to support. You want to make payments into China? Well, you hopefully support Alipay. You hopefully support Tenpay, and so on. And so for every market, every country, there's different payment methods they have to support. And so a company like Amazon, they employ 300 engineers that are, their entire job is to maintain these different API integrations. But if your entire company is just 10 engineers, you can't do that, And so I think what something like the Internet of Value could do is it could really make smaller scale business, and I mean that both in terms of the size of an organization, but also in terms of the size of the individual interaction that you're doing, effective or efficient enough to be viable. And so you could have a return of small businesses. You could have smaller transactions, like I'm paying for one blog post, I'm paying for one YouTube video, that are not really viable today. So I'm very excited about the scale that you can achieve when you bring down transaction costs. And again, the inspiration coming very much from the internet, where all the internet really did is make information so cheap that you could, information exchange so cheap that you could send very small amounts of information all the way across the world and have that be efficient enough to be viable. And so the same thing for money could be incredibly powerful in terms of like enabling new business models.
And I think what we see first when we have a new technology that's potentially revolutionary is how we can do the things that we're currently doing better. But I think over time we get to the phase where we start to discover new things that we couldn't do before. And I think what's exciting is that we're not in that phase yet. One of the analogies that I use a lot is email. Like if we had just come up with email and we said, what's the market for email? What's the use for email? We would probably say, well, there's postal mail. And a lot of postal mail, you need a physical object. If I order some goods, I need the physical object. If it's a very personal letter that's handwritten on beautiful stationery, like I need the physical object. That sounds silly to say today, but that's what people would have said when email came out. And they said, maybe if email takes over the world, maybe you could capture the 60% of postal mail where physical delivery is not essential. But of course, that completely misses the point of email, right? The point of email is that we use email for things that we would never even imagine using postal mail for. Computer programs send emails to each other. They're not going to write each other letters. What I think is super exciting is that we have this, micropayments are a good example. Like micropayments are just not viable today. So what are the use cases, the things we don't do today because we don't have micropayments? And we don't know. Like you try to think of them and it's very hard. What would happen if it cost what if a payment was as cheap as like a DNS request, as pulling up a web page? If you could make payments without even thinking about it, and you would probably automate them so that you would make payments for things that you were willing to pay for. I mean, we can think of obvious use cases like my phone could pay for Wi-Fi as I travel around the world. Not super exciting, but you know. But what the use cases that I think are going to be super exciting in the next 10 to 20 years are the ones that we can't think of, the things that become possible because we have these technologies that we haven't had historically.
Yeah, and someone who thinks of one of those ideas is going to make $1 billion. So maybe one of you, I don't know.
Great. So the final question. So we have lots of Ripple developers here, and you are building multiple products. So how can developers get more involved in your project?
So right now for IntelliJ, best step is to just go to intellij.org. There's a couple of tutorials on there. We also, if you are a developer and you're interested, we have a little mini hackathon tonight. So if you want to know more details about that, you can come find me after the talk, either here or back at the Ripple booth. And yeah, there's a chat room, there's a community group, a mailing list. All of that you can find on intellij.org, and you can get involved, and we'll be around to answer questions and help you get started.
And also, if you want to develop on top of the XRP ledger, take advantage of direct XRP payments, issuing arbitrary assets, and so on, all of the development documentation is available on Ripple's website.
Great. It's an honor to have you on the Fireside Chats. So right now, I'm going to open up the questions to the audience. So if you have any questions, it's free to ask.
Just a quick questions about, like, can you share with us a little bit about the plans to enter the Chinese market and things like that? Yeah, thank you.
So right now we haven't made any major announcements about the Chinese market. We've been working with a few partners in that area. But yeah, I don't have any announcements or anything to make at this time. Sorry.
Hello, can you hear me? I have two questions. One, could you tell us about your hiring requirements? What kind of people are you trying to recruit, and what kind of skill sets are you looking for? That's my first question.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you for giving us an opportunity to kind of pitch our recruiting. So we currently have 220 full-time employees. We have offices around the world. We're headquartered in San Francisco. We have a lot of open positions that you can find on our website, and that's everything from technical to marketing to business development, regulatory compliance, legal, I mean, across the board. We're looking for people who are strong in areas where we're not strong. We're not looking for people who are clones of people that we already have. And we're looking for people who are excited to work on interesting problems.
Yeah, I think one thing that I would highlight is sort of a love for payments. So we have a set of company values, and one of them we call Live It, which is we want people to have a certain passion about what they're working on. And so, you know, if you have had personal experiences with payments friction, maybe you've moved to a different country and it was very difficult to get set up, or maybe you've tried to start a business and run a small business that's interacting globally, and you know some of the pain points there, that definitely helps because it kind of keeps you motivated, and it keeps you empathizing with our customers, which is really helpful.
Okay, thank you. Could I ask a second question about Japan payment specifically? There doesn't seem to be a winning payment service in Japan. A lot of people are paying with their subway cards in convenience stores. People are paying with credit cards on different websites, but no one's winning. From your perspective, do you see a reason why Japan hasn't got a winning payment system? And do you have any thoughts about what could be different about this market than the other markets you've looked at?
So, I mean, obviously, I'm not an expert on Japanese culture, but from what I understand, it's a very cash-driven culture. So, you know, I've heard stories all the way to like people keeping, you know, bundle of cash in their fridge as a way to save. And so, you know, as a German, we're also a very cash-based culture, so I can somewhat understand that. And I think like part of what's been the issue is that the domestic settlement systems, Sengen and others, are not actually incredibly efficient and well suited for sort of retail payments. And so, whereas in some other countries like the UK, for example, with the Faster Payments Initiative, and China, where a lot of mobile money is already very successful, there hasn't been a really good solution that integrates with where people are actually holding their money, which is in the banks, and kind of like your day-to-day retail payments experience. And I think that there is an opportunity to build something like that. We've recently taken a first step towards that with an app called MoneyTap. So this is an app that's been released by the Japanese banking consortium, over 60 banks here in Japan, that is adopting Ripple technology. And the app kind of, it changes the user experience for domestic bank-to-bank payments in Japan. So, you know, today, if you make a domestic wire, you have to kind of enter the bank, the recipient information. You have to like get the right kanji and everything. And so, if you're a foreigner, if you're a foreign business person, it's kind of difficult to get that right. And so, with MoneyTap, you can actually put in like a phone number, or you can scan a QR code, and it automatically figures out all the right bank details. And so far, it's just a beta. It's just being trialed right now. But I could totally see that sort of application, you know, helping to change Japan and move it more towards a cashless society in the future.
I think one interesting difference in Ripple's approach to other companies is that we kind of took a bottom-up approach compared to other fintech companies. Most fintech companies are working at the very top layers where the systems are interfacing with the users. They're like new wallets or new ways to hold money. We're kind of working the opposite way from the bottom up, working on a new way to actually move money at the lowest layers. And I think what you're going to start to see happening is that as those bottom layers become more capable, that functionality will start to get pushed to the top. The challenge that you face today when you try to build new customer-facing top layers is you're building on top of existing infrastructure that was designed with completely different use cases in mind. So I'm optimistic that better solutions will appear in the future as those lower level systems improve, as they become more capable of faster payments, as they have lower cost, as the pools of liquidity become more open and deeper. I think you'll start to see those things pushed up.
Do you feel the